For our audience, how would you describe what you do?
I help families navigate their most difficult discussions and decisions. That's how my clients have framed it back to me. The more specifically, it's navigating this really complex intersection between family dynamics, which we all understand because we've all experienced it, and then family wealth. Most of us struggle with navigating what I call these areas that are high complex but high importance. So they're high importance, which means we can't avoid them, but they're high complexity, which means we want to avoid them because we don't know where to go.
That's a beautiful and scary way of putting it.
It really is. So it's up and to the right on important and complex. And it's sort of right at that spot that I think I get hired by families to come in and do that.
The quadrant where no one wants to be.
Yeah, but where no one wants to be, but where everyone knows they have to get to.
And you have a sort of lovely narrative arc of how you found yourself in this space. Can you walk us through your origin story and why you changed careers?
So I'm a lawyer by background, and I practiced law for 10 years in Toronto. Was 3 years at a large sort of corporate firm in downtown Toronto, and then left to go become a criminal prosecutor. What I think would have been my sort of true calling in life. I loved being in court. I was working for the Ministry of the Attorney General. I was in court all day, every day in front of judges and juries and prosecuting everything under the sun. Assaults, murders, frauds, internet crimes. And I loved that space so much. I had wanted to be a trial lawyer ever since I was a little kid.
What does that look like as a little kid?
I think it means I was watching too much Law and Order is what it means.
Okay.
No, I was always quick to raise my hand in school and sort of debate something. Whenever me and my, jackass friends would throw an egg at somebody's house and, someone would come and get us in trouble, I'd say it's okay. Like I'd go to the front and want to navigate that and negotiate it. So
your friends would call on you to settle sort of schoolyard scores.
I've always been comfortable getting in front of someone and trying to come up with a compelling case. And I think the other side of it is just, and you and I talked about this off air, but I have just been a perpetual, I would say, question asker. My friends and family would say cross-examiner. So law was a very, very natural area for me to go into because it requires a lot of analytics. And then there's a background here. The background is, though, I grew up in an immigrant entrepreneurial family. So parents came to Canada. Dad came by boat from Egypt with $300, and just he's 87 now, and came in 1964. December 14th to the east coast of Canada, and I think I can honestly say he's not taken a day off work. I mean, he's just that guy who showed up, started businesses. We ran a family restaurant growing up. We were that proverbial immigrant family you see where mom was, the hostess. My older brother was bussing tables. I was washing dishes. My dad did everything. My younger sister came along after and, spent most of her, baby years in that restaurant. And the running joke in our family is that my brother and I were disappointments to my parents because all we wanted to do was be doctors and lawyers. We didn't want to be entrepreneurs. So the immigrant dream of your kids get educated. So I went on and became a lawyer. My brother became a doctor. My sister went and got her business degree. My dad sold the restaurant because he had no succession plan. He's a lifelong entrepreneur, so he couldn't stay out of it. So he started another business, which was stone quarries.
Wow, that must have been a hard transition for him.
I don't think anything phases that guy. I think it would have been hard. He's just a natural born entrepreneur.
He's one of those people excited by the challenge.
That's very well said. Yeah. And there's a great story in terms of how he started that, but it began with someone telling him it was impossible to build that business. And his actual words were, I was excited by this, so I bought it.
Yeah.
And so he was running that and we were all off doing our own thing and it was fine. But there was no succession plan in place. And I was on a bike ride one day with my brother, and it sort of dawned on us that if, God forbid, Dad got hit by a bus, it would be chaos and catastrophe. And that was a very upsetting feeling. And we didn't care about the money. We were all doing fine in our own careers, but we were very upset at the thought of the chaos that would create in our family. And I remember the thought being sort of like, I sort of just spent a lot of time ruminating on it, and I just thought, this is a beautiful journey that my parents have sort of gone on. They came here with nothing. They raised their children. They started life in a new country. They built these businesses. I don't want this to have a bad ending. And it's going to have a bad ending if we don't come in and come up with a plan. And I realized early on, people's greatest asset and their greatest liability is the exact same thing. And for many great entrepreneurs, their specialty is reality distortion. They do not see the world the way the rest of us do.
Otherwise, they wouldn't have the built-in optimism to try things, right? To take
That's
the
right.
risks.
If they were, Steve Jobs said it really well. If you're rational, you wouldn't do this.
Yeah.
So my dad is the ultimate reality distortion entrepreneur. He finds it. He's the world's greatest optimist. It's so impressive. Nothing is negative in that guy's, like, everything is going to work his way. He idles at
Yep.
optimism. He will always find a way to win. So that's an
Yeah.
amazing trait. And I think it's led to his success. And it's something I admire. And I'm so thankful he gave me the gift of optimism. And optimism, not in a, oh, it's okay, I don't have to do any work, everything's going to be fine. It's optimism as in, I'm going to make the universe bend to my will.
It's self-belief, right? It's following, your own star. It's that kind of optimism. It's not that the universe will come to you, but it's the belief that you can take control of the universe.
That's exactly what it is. I will make it so.
Yeah.
That's how I sort of describe it, right?
Yeah.
And no matter what happens, he would just never hear a no. It didn't matter. He would just, so that's an amazing trait. And it was frustrating at times to grow up around that, but in hindsight, I loved growing up around it. Had a hugely positive influence on me. I hope that I have taken even some of that into my own life, but that personality type is not great at succession in a lot of ways because they can't plan for a rainy day because in their mind, it's not going to rain. So why would I do that?
That is very interesting.
Yeah. It's hard for them to think about their own mortality.
Okay.
Which is hard for all of us to think about. But, mortality is I call it one of the big three uncomfortable truths.
You're going to have to say what the other two are now.
In my work, working with families and wealth and succession, this is a tough one, but you can love your kids equally, but still have to treat them differently.
Yes.
So the inequality in terms of how they present in the world of progeny is a very hard, uncomfortable truth to navigate. And then the third one is you can't avoid the human condition, right? So this idea that, like, we're all subject to the laws of the human condition. Like, no one has found a way to cure the world of the human condition. And every time we try to create a system that says, if humans could behave this way, then we'd have a certain world. And it's like, yeah, but you've missed the key part of that, which is human behavior has been a certain way for a long time. So I'm very big on whatever solutions you create in the world have to be grounded in the reality of the human condition, because all problems are born from the human condition. So you have to build solutions around the reality that exists, not around a fantasy of what humans should be.
Okay, interesting. So you're on this bike ride, and this is the catalyst for these ideas starting to flow around your head, the shift between the fantasy and the reality?
Yeah. Well, and the reality setting in of, if we don't have a succession plan in our business, this is going to go poorly for my family. And so I remember just thinking about that, and it sounds like a gruesome thought, but I'm a big believer in inviting people to, this applies to everyone across the board. You got to go to the end and then work backwards from there. So it sounds like a gruesome thing, but you need to do it, or I invite people to do it. So think about the drive home from the funeral. The funeral is over. Where does your mind go? Think about that for anyone in your family, let alone yourself. That's a whole other conversation in itself.
Yeah.
So when it comes to the business world, or in any family situation, but certainly in our case, I was thinking about the business world, is you want that drive home from the funeral to be an opportunity to think about the love and the loss. You want to think about this wonderful person. You want to be able to marinate and meditate on the loss. What you don't want to say is, who has the key to the factory? How complex is our life going to get now? You don't want a series of complications ratcheting up after such a difficult moment.
You don't want to be bogged down in logistical details.
Exactly, because that's what that experience should be. It should be, what do you want in that moment? You want the opportunity to mourn and to celebrate. And so I remember thinking, with respect to our own father, I thought, oh man, this is going to be complicated. And so I went to my brother and my sister and I said, hey, I'm thinking I'll leave law. At the time, I thought I'll leave law for a year. I'll go home.
Yep.
I was living in another city. I'll learn the business. I'll get it sold. Dad can retire and we're fine. And they were like, that sounds great. And I went and talked to my parents and they seemed to be okay with it. Although I learned very quickly that I either didn't communicate it properly or they didn't hear me properly. But I left law to go run the family business. And this is where my mind got opened up to this whole world, because I went in with the best of intentions. I think everyone had good intentions. And within 6 months, I nearly blew up the family and blew up the business. It was awful. I was terrible.
Wow.
My dad and I fought like crazy. He treated me like I was still the 16-year-old that stole the car repeatedly. I treated him like he was the old man and the idiot, and I was the young, smart lawyer who's going to come in and tell the world how it needs to be run. My mom got stuck in the middle. My siblings were, hearing terrible things from me as I said, I'm so mad at dad, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I remember sort of hitting the spot where I was like, okay, that's it. I'm going to pack up and leave. And I thought, no, I've got to figure this out. And that was my eyes being opened to, oh, you've got to learn how to navigate family dynamics if you're going to try to navigate a family business. It's the family part that is the hard part to solve.
Yes.
That's where you have to start.
The picture you've painted is one I think everyone can see, right? Like everyone has that intergenerational gap. And I mean, I guess there's the cultural gap too, because your dad grew up in such completely different circumstances. Because he was in Egypt, I imagine, with even less than you had.
Totally. He did. There was, generational gap for sure, which everyone faces. There was definitely a cultural gap. And I would just say our communication style as a family. And I don't, most families are poor communicators. And the reason for that, and it's one of the things I see every single day at work, is think about when a family establishes your communication patterns. This applies to every single one of us. We establish our communication patterns, and I'm dealing with it now in my own family because I have, 5 kids now. They're a bit older. My kids are between 7 and 15 now. You're establishing it under suboptimal circumstances. Because raising young kids, you're sleep deprived and you're stressed. So you start sort of in that situation. You're figuring yourself out as you grew up. You're figuring out your life. You're figuring out how to be a parent. My mom said it really well. The problem with parenting is that by the time you're an expert, you're unemployed, right? Like you become an expert when your kids are gone. So you establish all these patterns. There's natural hierarchies that you create in your family because parents and kids, et cetera. There's a set of group dynamics which are horizontal because now you're dealing with siblings. And if you juxtapose that with what you would do if you were creating a board or a company and said, here's what our rules of governance are going to be, think how different they'd be. So here's the problem. Now, fast forward 20 or 30 years, and you're a family who's a group of adults trying to solve a complex problem. But you haven't updated your communication code yet. So you're still communicating like you did. And this is this whole notion of family of origin or communication patterns. And this is why, whether you're in a family business or not, why all of us have experienced this idea of, I went back home for Thanksgiving. Oh, I can't believe how I felt. I suddenly find myself behaving in a way that I haven't acted since I was a 15-year-old, et cetera. We almost revert in many ways to our patterns of like our original family communication.
And so when money comes into it, when power and status and legacy comes into it, these rifts are amplified, but they were already there.
Yeah, exactly. So I often say that my work now, which is getting hired by these high net worth families and helping families navigate succession and navigate the difficult conversations around family dynamics and wealth, I often say to them, wealth is just a force multiplier. So whatever is there, wealth can accentuate it. It's not necessarily a creator of problems. It is on some fronts, but that creation of it is still something that's already existing. And resentment is obviously like a simple example that would jump to everyone. If I have a measure of resentment or a measure of disappointment in somebody, pouring wealth onto that is going to make it more.
Does it ever work the other way around?
Completely. And I was going to say, it's a force multiplier for good too. So if you think about generosity, so this is not a, wealth is bad. It's just, let's just be candid about the reality here. But if you think about the flip side of it, generosity, closeness. So I always say to my clients, we have to be very honest about wealth. I don't want you to view wealth as good or wealth as bad. I want you to view wealth as fire. So what does fire do? Fire cooks and fire kills. And we have to be the ones who are doing our best to be in control of it and making sure the fire is working for us, not working against us. And the second piece there is accept reality, which is this is the deck of cards that we have, so to speak. You don't pick your deck of cards. And that deck of cards refers to the people that are in the ecosystem and then our situation in life. Meaning you don't pick your brother-in-law, you don't pick your siblings, you don't pick your parents. Like you don't pick all these different situations. So I try to get my clients to understand, and again, this is true for all of us, is try to understand that, again, our optionality and our agency comes in how we navigate it, not who the players are that we're forced to navigate.
So if you're forced to navigate suboptimal players, how do you deal with it? How do you deal with estranged children, disinterested children, children who have different values, free riders, incompetent children? Should you be splitting your wealth and assets equally? Or is there an argument to be made that the more capable family members should have a greater stake or receive some sort of additional voting power or other benefit? I mean, I understand that there might be legal controls based on the way like a trust was set up that might make that impossible, but broadly, can you pick favorites and should you pick favorites?
Yeah. So if I can, I want to go back to something you said embedded in the question, which
Yeah.
is when you're forced to navigate suboptimal characters.
Yeah, let's start there.
Yeah. So I would even challenge that assumption. And this is something I try to invite clients to do, is just because you think someone's suboptimal doesn't mean they are. Meaning you might just not be a great match for each other.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that. And I think that's something that in families I see a lot where they say, you know, why does this person behave that way? They should behave ABC, not XYZ. And I say, well, hold on. We have to be understanding of the fact that different people operate in different ways. And let me just caveat that. I'm talking about good faith actors who have a different style and or a different capacity. That's different than a bad faith actor.
Okay, yes.
So when I deal with bad faith actors, I have a different approach. And we'll come to that in a second. One of the things I look for in families, and I'm very careful as to which families I take on working with, what I'm actually looking for is good faith actors. Are you an honest broker? I always say to families that are interested in hiring me, and I spend a bunch of time on the front end getting to know a family before I start working with them because it's such, intense work. And I say, I want to make sure that you're a good fit for me and I'm a good fit for you. I'll often say complexity doesn't scare me, chaos doesn't scare me, dysfunction doesn't scare you. Don't have a exclusivity on dysfunction. Like, I'm good with all of that, but you've got to be willing to do the work, and you have to be good faith participants. You have to be honest brokers. And I said, if you're willing to do that and not just looking for someone to come and pick sides or play referee or give you the answer and then enforce the answer, I said, then we can proceed. So in that front, and also with to answer your question, even if there's bad faith players, it's just easier to see. My answer to clients is you can love your kids equally and still treat them differently. So I always say it depends on the situation, and we have to figure that out and navigate it. Because the reality is you may end up treating your kids differently while still trying to treat them fairly because your kids are different people. And you have a responsibility to your family as best as you can to be able to do things that ideally set your family up for success as best as possible. And that may involve, so, the classic example where this manifests is you've got more than one kid and you have a business succession decision to make. And the one that seems to really get families is the parent ends up picking one person to be the leader of the business. And I, sort of talked about this offline. It's that is the premise of Succession, right? That is the TV show Succession, where it's like, who is the heir to the throne?
Actually, our mutual friend Jaron introduced you to me as someone who would, if you came into Succession, it wouldn't get to a second season. It wouldn't get to a second episode. Maybe you'd solve it that quickly.
Well, it's that's very kind of him. I've told him this before, and he knows it. He loves that line. So it's the truth is, we could have 10 episodes. They just wouldn't be nearly as dramatic.
Okay.
So I wouldn't actually solve it where we'd have an answer, but I would navigate it, hopefully. I would navigate it where it'd be less inflammatory, less disruptive, less explosive. We would navigate these uncomfortable truths in a productive way. That's what we'd be trying to do, which is still intense. And half of my clients have told me that we're all going to make our money by the Netflix series we're going to create on what we just uncovered for the past year. Like with so many of my clients have been like, oh my gosh, this would be such a great Netflix series, because again, it's the human condition unfolding in real time, but just with the backdrop of wealth and money and a family business.
Yeah. Except then you'd have to figure out who gets the Netflix royalties. And now you're a family member in that decision too.
That's right. I know. That's right. I'd have to come in and do that. I'd get a good lawyer. That's what I'd get Jaron to represent me on the deal, and I'd be okay.
You get Jaron, yeah. So why do people want to pass down their legacy to their children? Why not find just a great CEO and not bring the family into it at all? Just say you guys will all have this stake, but none of you are running it. Why do people want to keep family businesses in the family?
I pause because it's such a fascinating question, and I think different people would have different answers. So I think at our core, this is what I've observed. I think we have to start by being really honest and talk about the power of our own egos. And I don't mean that pejoratively. You spend a lot of time building something. and creating something, and you're proud of that.
Mm.
It's natural, I think, when you have children to want your children to share in your love and in your passions. That's a very, very natural thing. And everybody gets that. And by the way, very often it works. If, I've interviewed so many people, because every family I get into, I interview everybody and get to know them. This notion of the apple not falling far from the tree is just so damn true. We pick up so much from our parents, good, bad, and ugly. They are such massive influences on us. It's impossible not to.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, it's just the human condition. And why is it that if you love baseball, you introduce your kid to baseball? It's because you had such joy in playing baseball. You want to share that joy with another. Is part of it also ego in terms of, I want them to do this and it looks good on me? I think that's fair. I think that happens. But I think the non-cynical view is, this thing was great for us, for me, for our family. I want you to participate in it. So that's, at a very high level, that's a big run. I think the ego, you could go somewhat cynical with, and you could talk about our desire to live forever. And so if this business carries on forever, then that is good for our family and our legacy. And even though we're not going to be around to observe it, we like working towards that. Again, I think, let's just be honest about that. Then there's another one, which I see, and I'm still working my way through because it's different. I wouldn't say this is like an absolute, but it's something I think about. I do see a trend where we don't have the confidence in our kids to go do what we did. So I sometimes see parents saying, I've got this thing already built. You can step into the building on the 10th floor. I've already built it from 0 to 10.
Is that something new, or is that something that's existed for 200 years?
The reason I wonder if it's a new thing is we are definitely in an era of much more helicopter parenting than we've ever had before.
Okay.
So if you sort of take like the work of Jonathan Haidt and you sort of look at like how we've parented kids sort of since the mid 90s now for the last 30 years, there's definitely a difference in parenting styles now than the generation before.
Yeah.
His example is we used to let kids, come home when the street lights go off. But so I wonder if we've raised kids in this cocoon of protection. That generation never had that. That generation was like, you're thrown to the wolves and figure it out. And it's almost like now that they don't give their kids the same opportunity.
And that might have some degree of influence in the way they run the business as well, do you think? Do you think they're just not equipped, having been guided too closely? Or do you think it's more from the parent's point of view of continuing the philosophy of helicopterdom?
Yeah, so I think it's both.
Okay.
So what I would say, and this goes back to one of the uncomfortable truths. So if you remember, mortality is one of them. And then the second one is this idea that the inequality of our progeny, this idea that our kids aren't the same. Okay. So parents generally want to be seen as equal and want to try to at least externally treat their kids equally. But their kids aren't necessarily equally equipped. And by equally equipped, I don't even mean, again, it's not pejorative. One's a star and one's a dud. It might just mean they have different interests. But because we want to try to treat our kids the same, what will often happen, and I'll use a simple example, your family business is basketball and one of your kids is 6'10" and one of your kids is 5'10". But rather than you saying, one of these might not be so equipped to play basketball, right? You say, great, you're the 2 starting players of the team. That happens all the time. I'm going to put my kids in the business. I'm going to give them equal compensation or equal roles, something along those lines, because I'm trying to be fair and equal, but they're not equally equipped, or they don't even have an equal interest in it. But again, the human condition, you can never run away from the human condition. So what happens with the human condition when you take that dynamic and then you fast forward it 5 years, 10 years, et cetera, is now the gap between the different interests or the different skills is going to be widened, but we tried to externally treat them the same.
And I mean, I think it also, you have the additional relationship rift with the kid who's 6'10" feeling like they're pulling more weight, right?
Completely. So that happens a lot. Yeah. So I always frame this out in terms of like horizontal and obviously like, vertical is, have this relationship of sort of parent to child.
Yeah.
And again, that relationship exists in every ecosystem. It's just money is now a force multiplier. And then you have this horizontal one of child to child. And by the way, once they get married, that then
Yeah.
brings in the in-laws, so the brother-in-law or the sister-in-law, et cetera. And then once you bring in the third generation, now you have that.
Yes.
And here's a
Yes.
really fascinating thing that no one thinks about when they think about family business and family wealth. You'll really like this. I can tell by the way your mind works. You'll appreciate this. So all families have family dynamics, but family dynamics you can usually escape from by your early 20s. So, right? Like you're sort of, you're zero, you're born into your family, you don't pick your family of origin, you grew up in it, you figure out your family dynamics, good, bad, or ugly. And then at some point by 2025, you now have the option as a young adult to spend as much or as little time with your family as you want. Fair?
Interesting. Yes, totally fair.
So if I love my family, I end up getting the house in the same city, and then I see you on Saturdays and Thanksgiving, and we hang out all the time, and I want to be near you.
Absolutely.
But if I'm kind of like, you know what, I want to march to the beat of my own drummer. I don't like the way I feel around them. I don't like their influence on my kids, or whatever it is, you can then choose to spend less time with them, and you can start to now compartmentalize your family of origin to represent a smaller portion of your life. Okay?
Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, guess what family wealth does? It protracts that. Because what I then say is the patriarch or the matriarch is, guess what? I want you guys to all work in this family business, and there's this great opportunity for you. And so you say yes as that 25-year-old, and boom, you're now pulled back into that nest. And those family dynamics that you otherwise would have escaped from, you're now in that, I said nest, maybe it's a web. You're now in that web of family dynamics.
If you compartmentalized your family to be 10% of your total mental energy and suddenly it's 120%, you now have to make up that margin and you're not equipped to do it.
And you might not actually want to do it, but you wanted to say yes to the family business for a host. And most people don't think about this. Most people that I have experienced have very good intentions. But again, good intentions aren't enough when you're trying to navigate the complexity of the human condition. The human condition is so complex. But that thing we just discussed there, I see all the time, which is you've now extended family dynamics. So if there was always a rift between the two brothers, or there was always this weird competitive vibe, well, and now all of a sudden, and by the way, it's not just a family business. So let's escape that for a second. What if there's just family wealth? And I say, you guys are now, you three are now co-owners of this trust, or you guys are going to own this family property, so as a parent, one of the things that I invite parents to think about is be very mindful of setting your kids up into a situation where they're forced to be partners with their siblings beyond when they naturally would choose to do so.
Yeah.
Think about that for a second. And one of the first questions I ask families when I start with them is I say, hey, Jonah, you and your brother are business partners. You're both, you're 42 and 44. If you guys, I'll use your language. If you guys were mates in college, in uni, would you have picked each other as business partners? If you guys were just roommates, would you have picked you? And I would say that 8 or 9 out of 10 families that I've asked that to have said no. Now, it doesn't mean it's destined for failure. It's not. You can find a way. And this is, by the way, in a lot of ways where I sort of earn my paycheck, is I come in and they're like 10 years into this or 20 years into this. And then they say, oh my God. And I sort of help explain the dynamic, explain the prison that you're trapped in. And then I say, now here's the door. Here's how we actually navigate our way through that prison. And there are ways to do it. It's not impossible. But I do try to invite people to say, think about this in advance. And a framework I try to get people to think about when you're making decisions is always ask yourself, who are the decision makers? And then who are the people who feel the impact of my decision? So make a list of the decision makers and then make a list of the decision feelers. And so for parents, the decision feelers are obviously a much broader group than you probably initially intended. So be mindful of the impact of your decision when you make it.
Interesting. And so you're talking about how you became closer to your dad through your experience at your family business. What have you learned from both your experience in the family business and really in your negotiations, in your work about communication? And what lessons are you bringing into your personal life?
Well, I think the first one is just it highlights how critical productive communication patterns, skills, styles are. I mean, it's everything. So I have this funny line that I use when I speak, and it's I take it from the wisdom of Homer Simpson. So in the Prohibition episode of The Simpsons, they take alcohol to Springfield and then Homer becomes a bootlegger and then they bring it back. It's a great show, great episode. And at the end of it, he holds up his beer mug and he says, to alcohol, the cause, and solution to all of life's problems. And so I'll often say that's exactly what we could say inside of about communication inside of family dynamics. And so what I try to work on in my own life and what I invite my clients to really work on is I spend a ton of time on working on our how. Our how being, how do we communicate? Because the how is more important than the what. And what I mean by that is your process around decision making and communication is way more important than the thing you're talking about or the outcome you're focusing on. So if you think about what's our process here and you hone in on making sure you have the best process possible, you have a much higher likelihood of a better outcome. So I spend a lot of time with clients on actually setting up. We have, family meetings, and I help navigate them, and I run them, and I facilitate them. But more important than the family meetings is the next piece, which is I spend a ton of time with people one-on-one before the meetings, and I essentially cross-examine them before we go into the meeting in a good way, in a productive way. As Jaron would say, I used to cross-examine in court for a destructive purpose. Now I cross-examine for a constructive purpose. So I used to cross-examine a criminal to destroy them and break them down. Now I cross-examine you to build you up. But the goal here from that is I want you to get clarity in your own mind.
Yeah.
So if you think about what's the one thing that people can really do to communicate better, it's do the work in your own mind first. Most people show up to communicate with somebody, sort of like the loaded gun idea, and they haven't metabolized their emotions. They haven't metabolized their thoughts. They don't have internal clarity. And what I say is they're really showing up for a therapy session. They just need to get a bunch of shit off their chest.
I see.
Think about how often in families you just sort of are feeling something and then you just start talking and say it.
You start saying it, yeah.
Yeah, which is suboptimal communication, by the way, in case no one hasn't figured that out yet, right? Like in case the universe hasn't sort of slapped you back on the face with that yet. So I'm very big on actually spend time in advance getting your own clarity in your own mind as to how you really feel, what you really want to say, what you really want to see occur. And if everyone in the room can do that, not 100%, because that's probably impossible, but if everyone can improve in that a little bit, and then you enter into a discussion where you actually say, we're actually going to focus on communicating in a productive fashion rather than just trying to get a desired outcome, you'll do much better.
You need to be at peace with what you're going to say before you open your mouth.
Yeah. And a lot of times, and again, be at peace with it would be lovely. I think at the very least have some measure of clarity in terms of do the work internally. Which is easier said than done, much easier said than done.
Yeah, for sure.
But it leads to a much better result for everyone. And this, by the way, is applicable inside of a family business, but it's true, obviously, in a marriage. It's true with your children. And I have to remind myself of this all the time because I do this for a living and, I'm spending time with these great families, helping navigate this. But then I walk in the front door and, one of my teenagers says something to me and I don't want to take a moment to get clarity or figure it, right? Like I want to just respond to the moment, but I have to remind myself to.
For sure.
So we all struggle with it and we all have to work. And it's not you either do it or you don't. It's like everything. It's a work in progress. It's a continuing journey. Am I becoming a little bit more self-aware of this? Am I learning those patterns about myself and doing a better job of managing me?
Yeah, that's funny. I mean, I'm hosting a mindfulness-based podcast. So whenever I do something unmindful, the first thing a friend or a family member is going to say is, don't you host a mindfulness podcast? Or, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
and then I have to say, well, I'm just trying to get better. I never said I was enlightened. I just said I'm working on it.
Well, no, it's complete. And I think I appreciate your honesty on that. And it's very true. I think very often, I built the business that I wish I had when I had jumped into my family business.
Wow. Yeah.
Like that's how I ended up making this jump, right? It's like, I'm a lawyer. I leave law to go help my family. I learned the hard way that the family dynamics piece is so hard. I have to figure this out with my own family. And then I basically got to a spot where I had figured it out. I spend very little of my time on my family business. I spend 90% of my time now helping other families. In Canada, and obviously with some American families. And it's because I had lived it, went through it, and now I want to pour myself into it. And I do pour myself into it now, helping other families. because it's the thing that I recognized is a very high need.
Yeah.
It's like, what would I have given to have had someone come in and help our family navigate those things? It was so tough.
Well, that's your dad coming through you. You've bent the universe to make it fit.
Well, I hope so, and hopefully learn some lessons along the way that now I get the pleasure of sharing with others, as other families are kind enough to invite me in. And I'm so grateful because those families, and there's a self-selection in it, they are actually primed and ready for it. What they actually recognize is, wow, we've been trying to solve these problems, using old code.
Yeah.
And we've tried to come up with what I said, like we've tried to come up with a tangible solution to an intangible problem. So the intangible problem is the family dynamics. And most families try to solve an intangible problem through a tangible means. So we think money's going to solve it, or we think the right trust structure, or we think the right estate. And it's like, I tell families all the time, you can do all of that work, but if you can't focus on and try to navigate the intangible, it doesn't matter how good the tangible piece is. You got to start with the intangible part first.
You have to upgrade the operating system before you can run the programs, right?
That's well said. That's right.
So if I put you in a room with the Murdoch family right now, what would you say? You have an hour with them?
So I'd say very little. I would ask a lot of questions.
Uh-huh.
I would ask a lot of questions. I get asked this kind of stuff all the time, and I say there isn't a prescriptive answer that I have for people because my whole process and my business is, I call it principle advisors, because it's all based on principles. So I have a set of principles that I think are universal in their applicability, but I don't come with a set of prescriptions, because until I pop the hood and really get in there and understand people, and more importantly, Jonah, and you'll appreciate this, it's not even me understanding them, it's actually getting them to understand them.
Makes sense.
And I don't just mean get you to understand your brother, I mean get you to understand you.
Yeah.
Right? So you call me and you're like, man, and this is the classic situation, you got to come in and help us. My brother's crazy, or my sister-in-law is nuts, or right? Like that's the common thing, or I can't, my kids are doing this. And I say, great. And I listen and I listen and I listen. And then I say, great. And then I say, okay. So I start, we turn the spotlight on you a little bit, subtly and warmly. And lo and behold, we start to do a little bit of work there. And lo and behold, you realize that your opinions are now going to get changed a little bit, because you're going to start to reflect on things a little bit. It doesn't mean that everything you said about the other person isn't true. Both of those things can be true.
But you're opened up to an entire new set of perspectives once someone like Paul comes in and starts breaking these things down for you, or helping you just, as you said, introspect. Sometimes you need help to look inside.
Completely. Yeah, that's right. And so, and that's why, by the way, I'm not for everybody, because if you're not interested in a mirror being held up in some way, shape, or form, and again, I do it very friendly, it's very collegial, it's very like it's not me coming in with a sledgehammer. It's much more, let's just have the conversation, and I'm really just trying to invite you to think about something a little bit differently. And then I'm doing the same thing though with that brother that you just complained about. And then I'm talking to, and he's going through the same thing. And then I can find the overlap. And then once I've established rapport with you, I can come in and say, look, Jonah, I got to tell you here, you got to let this go. You actually are wrong here. Yeah. And at that point in time, if you're a good faith, honest broker, you're actually willing to, because you're like, I feel heard. There was 10 laments that I had. Paul's listened to all of them. He's helped me understand that 3 of those were here, 2 of those were here. And then this one I got to let go. Okay, good. And that's for like the negotiation, the mediation part. And it all takes time, but I see it happen over and over again. And then you connect everyone to, ideally, most families that I work with do have, and this is a beautiful thing with families, we actually do want to get along with our families. We all feel a sense of like joy and happiness when we feel connected with our families. Now, we don't always act that way, and we certainly don't know how to get ourselves there. Hence this idea of high importance, high complexity, right? Must solve, but can't solve. But we do want it. And so if I can come in and help get you X% of the way there, you're likely inclined to want to keep doing it because you like that result that you.
I love that. I love that. Paul, one thing I ask at the end of every interview is, what is one thing you're working on about yourself? It can be anything.
You want my answer or my wife's answer? Do you want know what she wants?
No. I want your answer. But it can be suggested by your wife if that helps.
The thing I'm working on most right now is saying no, and saying yes. I'm trying to learn where to say no, and say no more quickly.
Yeah.
And that might be no to a work thing in terms of like there's too much and I've got to say, no, I can't take this family on or I can't do this.
Yes.
Or it might be no to a social interaction. Like I'd love to do that, but if I go out for dinner, I'm going to miss out on a chance to hang out with my, teenage daughters and I have limited time with them because they'll be like,
you're trying to work out the opportunity cost a little bit.
To a certain extent, but just trying to get better at faster at saying no, but also, and this is the fun part, is faster at saying yes. So I'm a lawyer by training, highly analytical. I could stand on the shores for 10 years trying to plan the perfect route across the ocean. And one thing I've been really challenging myself with is just say yes. So my line to myself lately is start saying yes to 8s and stop waiting for the 10s. That's what I've been working on.
Okay.
I'm just like, you know what? This is an 8. You're good, Paulie. Say yes.
Yeah.
Right? Like, okay, you want yes, say yes. Just hit yes at 8. I've thought my way through it. It looks like it's a 7 or 8 out of 10. Say yes there. Don't wait till you got it perfected.
Okay, but that comes with saying no to sub.
Totally, that's right. Because so you have to free yourself up on the no's, and then you got to. So I'm trying to get quicker at saying no and quicker at saying yes. So those are the things I'm working on.
Yeah.
But they're interesting because you're saying no to one thing, yes to another. But it's not so much an automatic yin and yang. It's not the same thing. They're different areas. And I'm just looking at my own weaknesses, and I have a tendency to say yes to things out of a sense of obligation or I'd enjoy. And I'm like, no, say no to those for now. And then I have a tendency to say no to things because it's not perfectly baked. And I'm like, and that's where I'm coming in and I'm saying, no, start saying yes to those and start saying no to those. So that's the challenge that I'm working on.
Great response. Hey, Paul, it's been so much fun. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Jonah. Great to chat with you. Thank you for all the great questions.
If you enjoyed this show or found it helpful, simply leaving a rating or a review is one of the most helpful things you can do. It means so much to us to know you're getting some value from these conversations, and the reviews and ratings really do go a long way to help us continue to grow the show and therefore provide better and more frequent content. And to everyone who has listened this far, thank you so much for joining me today. You have my deepest gratitude. It's a pleasure to be on the journey with you. I'm Jonah Primo. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back on Monday for more of the Overexamined Life.